Hi, I'm Lloyd Swain with Charter Channel 3, and welcome to our program, Charter Talk today, special edition. Have you ever had anybody in your life that really stood out and that you really liked and admired and so forth? Well, today we're going to be speaking to a man who had a great fascination for a fellow, and he's here to talk with us about the life and politics of Senator Harry Cain, and his name is C. Mark Smith, and he's the author. And welcome to our program today.
Thanks, Lloyd. It's good to be with you.
Why did you write this book? It's called Raising Cain, The Life and Politics of Senator Harry Cain. I'm very curious to find out why you wrote a book about him.
Well, probably your listeners probably are too, because not very many people today have ever heard of Harry Cain. But he was a United States Senator from state of Washington prior to Scoop Jackson. He had been a banker in Tacoma during the Great Depression. Then ran the centennial, the 50-year Washington Centennial celebration, 1939 in Tacoma, and then was elected mayor in 1940 when he was 33. He then took on the bootleggers and took on the prostitutes and took on the rest of the city council, which was kind of still operating in the good old days, and was very controversial, very successful. In 1942, he was reelected by the greatest plurality of any mayor in Tacoma history. They didn't even to the point where they didn't require a general election. 1943, the war came along, and he went off to become a military government officer, and was on Mark Clark's staff and Ike's staff, and ended up as assistant chief of staff for Matthew Ridgway for the 18th Airborne Corps. When he was in London in 1944, Arthur Langley, then governor of Washington, convinced him to run for the Senate. He had always been a Democrat, but there were lots of Democrats who could run and people knew about, but there weren't any Republicans in those days. So Arthur Langley convinced him to run for the Senate as a Republican. He ran against Warren Magnuson, who was then making his first run for the Senate in 1944. And he lost, but he didn't lose by much. And then went across northern Europe at the end of the war. It was Harry Cain who went to Bavaria and wrote the report about George Patton using Nazis in the civic administration of Bavaria. They got Patton fired. He came back, ran for the Senate, got elected, and then became one of the most controversial senators in the period 1946-1952.
You know, he in the book you talk about his fight for individual rights, and that kind of followed him throughout his entire career. And he didn't really hold loyalty to any party. He did go from Democrat to Republican and
kind of back again.
Is that why he was a controversial politician? Is because he did not adhere a lot to the party rules that he was in at the time?
Yeah, I think today we'd probably call him a loose cannon. In those days, he had gone to college at the University of the South at Sewanee, Tennessee.
Oh my gosh!
And while he was in college, he developed a set of core values, and they always trumped his politics. And in today he'd be called a libertarian, like Ron Paul. But in those days, of course, we didn't have that. So he was a very strong supporter of constitutional rights. He was believed in individual freedom and personal liberty, just as little government as you needed to have, and he believed in free markets and an adequate national defense to take care of things like Pearl Harbor and winning the Second World War, but not enough to go out and to get involved in everybody else's business.
So he was also, you knew him, you kind of grew up around Harry Caine. Talk about that.
Well, of course, I grew up in Tacoma.
Sure.
And my dad was a pretty successful mortgage banker over there, and he had supported Harry before the war, and then when he ran for mayor. So when he came back from the war and was elected to the Senate, he sometimes would stay at our house when he was out in the state campaigning. And I was in high school, just finishing up. Mm-hmm. So here is this larger-than-life, vital guy with this big, deep, booming voice.
And he was that way. He really liked the limelight.
Oh yeah, he did. He was a show horse in terms of publicity. He'd actually been trained as a newspaperman. So that was his original training. He ended up going into banking because there weren't any jobs. It was the bottom of the Depression, and there weren't any jobs anywhere. Sure. And his dad helped him get a job with the Bank of California in Tacoma, and he stayed there until he ran for mayor of Tacoma. But he was always inquisitive. In 1935 and 1936. He took a leave of absence and went to Germany and England for a year with his then brand new wife, and he wanted to see what was going on in Europe. And he quickly came to the letters home. One of the things we looked at, were 60 letters and a notebook that he kept during that travel.
Was this in the 30s?
Yes, this was 1935.
Right around what Hitler was.
Sure, this is the occupation of the Rhineland,
and
the 1936 Summer Olympics in Berlin. He saw Hitler in an outdoor stadium, seated not an awful long way away from him. And came back, and the thing that got him started in public life was that he came back and he started making speeches about what he had seen in Germany and warning everybody about what was coming.
And did they listen to him?
They thought some thought he was telling the truth, some thought he wasn't, but they all found him very entertaining.
You know, you talk a little bit about that he really influenced your career choice, which you have a lot of experience and recognition in the economic development field. How did he influence your life and move you toward public service?
Well, he's the person that convinced me, talked to me about going into public service and talked to me about the value of public service and why people need to serve, and even if it's not in the biggest position that there is. I mean, just serve in any way you can. And that was something that always stuck with me. I of course, also because of him, I was interested in politics and interested in government, and I've always retained that. Not too long out of college, I was running a congressional campaign over there, and then I got appointed to a top position in the Economic Development Administration, and then that led to a 40-year career managing economic development organizations at the local, state, and national level.
One of the other areas that I know you talk about is that the reason that you wrote this book are for his children. He
Yeah, that's an interesting story. Harry had two children. Mm-hmm. One of them, a boy born in 1937, and a girl whose real name was Marlis, but they named Candy, so she had to live with Candy Caine the rest of her life. Oh, no. She was born a month after he went off to the war in 1943, and she lives in Tacoma. And when he died, the children and I set up a scholarship in his name at the University of Puget Sound. And so since she lives there, she goes to the scholarship luncheons. And she would always send me an email after it was over saying how great the kid was that she met. And then in mid-2008, she added a sentence to an email. She said, "You know, you probably know more about my father than I do." And I thought about that a little bit, and I thought, I think I do. At least I certainly know him in a different way than you know him.
Sure.
Because because he was in the Senate, and then he was appointed to the Subversive Activities Control Board during the Eisenhower administration, and he was gone all the time. And the children were boarded from the time they were about 4 or 5 years old, so they were hardly ever home. So they really didn't know this bigger than life guy that was their father. Well, I knew him as a public figure, but I knew him in a little more personal way, and my father knew him in a little more personal way than children know their father.
What will readers find if they take a look at your book? You also talk about wanting to bring this out because of the integrity and those core values that he developed while in college. What will the reader find interesting about his life?
One of the things I think is really important is his service on the Subversive Activities Control Board. Most people today won't remember what that was, but it was a quasi-judicial organization that was created.
Was that the McCarthy?
It was created in the late 40s and existed during the McCarthy years, and basically what it did was to have a judicial proceedings when the Attorney General would bring charges against some organization as to whether or not they were communist or fascist or something else. So he was appointed after he was defeated by Scoop Jackson. He was appointed to that commission. Well, what he found when he was on that commission was that the lives of thousands and thousands of public employees were being ruined by charges, often unsubstantiated, that this employee was un-American, or was a communist, or was socialist, or was in some way had antisocial behavior, and there were no rules. So the employee had no way to defend themselves. Didn't even know who was bringing the charges. Now that was separate from what his responsibility was on the Subversive Activities Control Board, but it was going on, and he found out that it was going on, so he started speaking out against it.
Would these people lose jobs?
Oh,
and
absolutely.
They would destroy their lives?
Yes. And every time the country gets threatened, whether it's the Civil War or the Red Scare at the end of World War I, or the Second World War, or the Cold War, we react by having a conflict between internal security of the country and the civil liberties of its people. And he brought that out loud and clear in the McCarthy era, and ended up getting fired. Or not reappointed by Eisenhower because of it. But he conducted something called the Caine Mutiny, where he went out and spoke all over the country against what was going on in the internal security field in the country. And of course, Eisenhower, by that time, even though he didn't create the program, it was his program, and he didn't appreciate one of his appointees going out and raising hell about it.
Did that end his career, pretty much?
No, it ended his public career.
Public career, sure.
But then he was at the end of it, 1953. He was out of work, out of money.
Wow.
Ended up getting a job in Florida, working for a very large savings and loan in Miami. And those people had known him when he was in the Senate, and he had vacationed down there, and they made him the vice president of communications for the bank. So he spent the next 20 years dealing with coming back around to become a moderate. He still was a Republican, but he opposed the Vietnam War. He supported civil rights. He tried to build a Florida Republican Party by combining the emerging black vote and Cuban vote with the traditional old line Republicans. But of course, that wasn't where the party is. So we're facing that again in the after 9/11. We're facing many of those same struggles between internal security and individual freedom with the Patriot Act.
You think people would learn that they could see something of historical value in how things are perceived today, or how things are today versus when he was around? And
I think they would. I think the book, although it doesn't, it's really a subset of the book, but I think the book very clearly draws people's attention to that conflict and asks them to think a little bit about what's going on today.
how would he fare today in today's political world? Who would you compare him to if you could?
Oh gosh, I don't think there's anybody. There are very few people in either party that are as flamboyant and colorful as Harry was, but as politicians were there were many more flamboyant politicians in those days than there are today. Today it's all about the polls and getting reelected and doing as little as possible to alienate people. Harry's view was you go out and tell them what you think and let them, they're smart enough to draw their own conclusions. Well, they did draw their own conclusions and they defeated him. But he would do exactly the same thing today. And
so the end of his career was working for this company, the banking industry, and he passed on in Florida
in 1979. He spent 20 years trying to be a moderating force in the Florida Republican Party, and very strongly considered running for the Senate twice from Florida. One of the wonderful things about the book is that so much of it is in his own words. So I had to work from. I had this notebook that he kept when he was in England and Germany,
like a
during
journal.
a journal. And then from his years as mayor, I had 18 scrapbooks. Those great big, thick scrapbooks, Harry's one of those guys that never saw a reporter or a cameraman he didn't like. So he was excellent copy. So there was a lot of copy about him all through his public career.
He'd be great at 30-second sound bites, wouldn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
So you have a website, but how can people get this book?
Well, the book's available at all normal outlets, Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
Sure.
It's available online through those outlets, and then I do have a website, which is raising-cain-book.com. That's a little complicated, but you can order the book from the website, and I'd be happy to autograph a copy that way. Otherwise, if they get it through Amazon or Barnes and Noble, obviously it isn't autographed.
Raising Cain, The Life and Politics of Senator Harry Cain. Sounds like a fellow that I'd like to know and be around in my younger formative years.
I think you'd enjoy him today, Lloyd. I know you well enough to know
that's great.
You'd enjoy knowing him. He'd be a great speaker at our Rotary Club.
How long did this take you to write, by the way?
I started it in June 2008 and finished it in March or April of 2010.
I think political science students would get a lot out of this book, don't you think?
I think so, and it's being used in some classes at UPS, right?
That's great. That's great. Well, C. Mark Smith, the author of Raising Cain: The Life and Politics of Senator Harry Cain. Thank you so much for being here today and talking about your book, which all of you can find at various book locations around the Tri-Cities and also online. You could even probably do a search called Raising Cain and that website would come up. So I'm Lloyd Swain with Charter Channel 3. Thank you for watching.